If you've ever found yourself analysing a text message, a silence, a change in behaviour, or simply had that feeling that something isn't right, this video will give you a 5-step process to separate what you know from what you're assuming, so you can respond to what's actually happening rather than creating unnecessary relationship problems from information you don't yet have. When something feels wrong in a relationship, how do you know whether it's intuition or whether you're making an assumption? I want to give you a very practical way of navigating this, because I've realised something. You don't actually need to decide whether a feeling is intuition before you can respond intelligently to it. You simply need to know what to do with the information you're receiving. Here's a 5-step formula you can use whenever something happens and you feel that immediate emotional reaction. What actually happened? What did I feel? What did I assume? What do I actually know? And finally, what information do I still need? Let's use a classic relationship example. You've sent someone a text because you'd like to meet. 12 hours later, no reply. Immediately, you feel something: rejection, anger, perhaps anxiety. And then a thought arrives: he's losing interest. And this is where something very important happens. Because the feeling is real, we assume the explanation must be real too. But they're two completely different things. You genuinely feel rejected. That does not mean you've actually been rejected. Never dismiss the feeling. Just don't automatically promote it to a fact. So let's investigate. Step 1. What actually happened? I decided I'd like to meet on Monday. I sent a text suggesting we meet and what we could do. 12 hours later, I haven't received an answer. That's it. Notice how little information we actually have when we strip away the story. Step 2. What did I feel? I felt rejected. I felt unimportant. I felt angry that he didn't reply quickly. Again, don't argue with those feelings. They're real. Something happened inside you. That's useful information. But now we need to separate the feeling from what your mind decided the feeling meant. Step 3. What did I assume? This is where it gets interesting. I assumed he received the text. I assumed he was available to read it. I assumed he read it immediately. I assumed he had time to respond. I assumed he would want to respond immediately. I assumed the speed of his response reflected the importance of our relationship. And finally, I assumed that because he hadn't replied, he wasn't interested in seeing me. That's an enormous amount of information, none of which he actually gave me. Which brings us to step 4. What do I actually know? Very little, if nothing at all. I know I sent a text. I know 12 hours have passed. I know I haven't received a reply. That's the evidence. Everything else, at this stage, is interpretation. This is why I think we can sometimes confuse emotional reactions with intuition. The feeling arrives first, then the mind produces an explanation. And because the feeling is powerful, the explanation feels true. But feelings aren't necessarily evidence that our interpretation is correct. So what about intuition? You don't actually have to solve that question in this moment. If something inside you is saying, something doesn't feel right, honour it. Don't suppress it. Don't talk yourself out of it. But don't immediately decide what it means either. Investigate. If something really is happening, reality can give you more information. Which brings us to the 5th question. Step 5. What information do I actually need? In this example, I need to know whether he received my message and whether he'd like to meet. So now I communicate, not from rejection, not from anger, not from the story that he's losing interest. I communicate to obtain the information that's missing. Something like, "Hi John, I sent you a message yesterday about meeting for dinner at Genos on Monday at 7 p.m. Could you let me know that you received it?" You don't need to decide immediately, but if you could let me know by Sunday afternoon whether you'd like to come, that would be great. I'm happy to book us a table. Look at what's happened. I've said what I want. I've provided the information he needs. I've asked for confirmation. I've given him freedom to decide. And I've communicated when I need an answer. Now my job is done. And this is where another important relationship distinction comes in. Before sending another message, ask yourself, am I requesting information I genuinely need? Or am I trying to get this person to remove an uncomfortable feeling inside me? Those are very different things. Clarification gathers information. Reassurance seeking tries to make uncertainty disappear. If I send the message clearly, And then 5 minutes later, I'm checking whether he's online, sending another message, wondering why he hasn't answered. I'm no longer trying to communicate what I want. I'm trying to use his response to regulate how I feel. So once you've communicated clearly, give the other person room to respond. Because whatever happens next is information. And that's important too. This isn't about endlessly explaining away someone else's behavior. One unanswered text isn't evidence that somebody doesn't care about you. But if you've repeatedly communicated clearly and someone repeatedly ignores you, now you have something different. You have a pattern. Don't turn assumptions into evidence, but equally, don't ignore evidence when it arrives. This is one of the reasons I find relationships so fascinating. They make our communication visible. Something begins inside you as an intangible desire. I'd like to see him. But another human being can't respond clearly to something that remains inside you. You have to give it form. What do you actually want? When? Where? What are you asking the other person to decide? Communication becomes the bridge between an internal desire and an external experience. And the other person's response gives you feedback. Not about your worth, not necessarily about whether you're loved, but about what has actually been communicated and what that person chooses to do with it. That's why relationships can become such powerful mirrors. They expose the places where we're expecting other people to know things we haven't articulated. They expose assumptions, they expose fear, they expose our relationship with uncertainty. And sometimes they expose genuine incompatibility. But clarity allows us to find out which one we're actually dealing with. So what's the takeaway? The next time something happens in a relationship and you feel that immediate emotional hit, slow everything down. Don't dismiss the feeling. But don't build an entire relationship story around it either. Ask, what actually happened? What did I feel? What did I assume? What do I actually know? And what information do I still need? Then communicate clearly. Give the other person room to respond. And observe what happens next. Because one of the easiest ways to create unnecessary pain in relationships is to react to information we never actually received. The feeling is real, the assumption may not be. And clarity begins when we learn the difference.